My fellow Americans, give me your tire, your poor, your homes, your businesses, your money. Just mark yes to questions 27 and 28, and I, Mike Masaoka, will let you stay right here in paradise. Desert, swamp, or dusty waste, they say location's key. Sure, you shiver in this icebox, but cheer up, the rent is free. And don't you love to freeze in line for soggy bowls of rice? Just put up and shut up, 'cause you're in paradise. Is everybody happy? Oh! Tough. When it's pitch black dark at night, the army might assume that you're trying to escape. If you're running to the bathroom, let them aim their spotlights down, but smile real nice. Just put up and shut up, 'cause you're in paradise. Ain't it grand in paradise?
The water tastes like rust, the bedding's filled with rowdy lies. Here's a little sound advice.
You better take my sound advice. Just put up and shut up, 'cause you're in paradise. Now they aim to separate disloyals from the rest. All you have to do to pass is hold your nose and answer yes. But no seals your fate, and you will pay a heavy price. They'll grab you and send you away from paradise. Ain't it grand in paradise? The snakes will let you be if you feed them all the mice.
If you answer no twice,
Lord, if you check it twice, you know no, you'll go away from paradise. You don't want to take that chance, so answer yes, do the paradise dance. Woo! Come on, ladies! Should, right? Put up and shut up. Just put up and shut up.
just put up and shut up, just put up and shut up. Just shut it up. You're in paradise.
Well, hello everyone. I guess we're running pretty much on time today, so I'm going to start now. I am Lynn Deutscher-Kobayashi, the Vice President of the NAJC. And as human rights is a priority for the NAJC, the Vice President is by design the chair of the Human Rights Committee. And I am greeting you from Toronto, which is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. And the Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Thank you so much for joining us. As the weather gets better and there is so much to see online, we really appreciate that you've joined us and you're sharing your time with us. Before I start with the main program, I just wanted to say a word about the acts of violence that took place last week. The NAJC and most of its member organizations condemned the acts of violence that took the lives of 8 people, including 6 Asian women in Atlanta. We mourn their loss, and our hearts and minds are with their family, friends, and communities. And we echo these words of the JACL, written on March 16th. Whether these murders were intended to target the victims because of their work, gender, or their Asian ethnicity, they come at a time when our community is already feeling exposed and vulnerable. The impacts of the discrimination and outright racism that have been brought to the forefront by the COVID-19 pandemic have continued to wear us down. And while the motives behind this most recent attack still remain unknown, the implications are harrowing. So I think it's a good time to be thinking about the NAJC Gordon Hirabayashi Human Rights Award. And that's what brings us together tonight. Now, the award was the idea of Mike Murakami, a Torontonian who lived in Edmonton many years. Now, technical difficulties prevented us from recording an interview, as I had hoped, so I will speak for Mike. Well, Mike got the idea for the award when in conversation with Susan Carnahan, Gordon's widow, they were talking about where to preserve boxes of materials related to Gordon's involvement with Japanese Canadian communities. He realized that Gordon's legacy needs to be properly archived and recognized. So when Mike Murakami returned to Toronto in 2008, he got involved with the JCCC Heritage Committee and the Toronto NAJC Board. And it became his mission to create an award to honor Gordon. He had hopes that the recipients of the award would try to match Gordon's human rights record. Now, the award was fittingly unveiled in Edmonton, where Gordon's family lived, at the 2012 NAJC AGM, shortly after Gordon died. Lillian Nakamura Maguire, the NAJC Vice President and Human Rights Committee Chair of the time, presented the award to Tatsuo Kage, a most deserving recipient of the award. Now, Mike himself met Gordon around 1976 when he was recruited to work on the EJCA Heritage Day Pavilion by George Yamada, the publisher of Rika magazine. As well, Mike's mother, Eiko Murakami, and Gordon were EJCA board members. They were on the seniors committee and they had several meetings at Mike's home over the years. Mike recalls many interesting conversations with Gordon, which inspired him to get involved with Edmonton organizations like the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights and the Center for Race and Culture. Mike remembers that at that time, Gordon's Edmonton friends included Anne and David Sunahara, Professor Baha Abu Laban, Yumiko and Jim Hoyano, Captain George Saruda, and Dr. Henry Shimizu. And in fact, Dr. Henry Shimizu, when he heard about this event, was in touch with me and he wrote about his close friendship with Gordon Hirabayashi. Now, I regret not having time to read his tribute, but we will post it on our website. Well, Dr. Shimizu ended his tribute with a quote by Senator William Fulbright, who said, "To criticize one's country is to do it a service. Criticism, in short, is more than a right. It's an act of patriotism, a higher form of patriotism. I believe patriotism, than the familiar rituals and national adulation." Well, I guess we can have a lot to say about national adulation after the last 4 years. Well, about the award, briefly, the nominee can be an individual or a group committed to the mission statement of the NAJC, which is to strive for equal rights and liberties for all people, particularly racial and ethnic minorities. The nominee must live and operate in Canada, and the award will not be given posthumously. And the nominee may or may not be of Japanese ancestry or a member of the NAJC, but should be supportive of the NAJC mandate. So please check our website for complete details. The deadline is June 30th, and the winner will be announced at our AGM. And I'm pleased to announce that this year, the award will come with a $1,000 prize to be given to the individuals or organization to give to their cause of choice. So like you, I'm here to learn more about this remarkable man. A quote I read the other day resonated with me. It said, "Through memory, love transcends the limits of time and offers hope at any moment of our lives." Well, clearly Gordon Hirabayashi was beloved. And as we remember him at this moment in time, and I have no doubt that in learning more about his life and influence, we will be driven to hope, not hate, and be rather than fear and hate. And we will be emboldened to hope even more. So I'm going to now introduce Takashi Oki, because he has some personal memories to share of Gordon. And my introduction will be brief to allow him more time to speak. Tak arrived in Vancouver in 1964 to attend the University of British Columbia, and he stayed in Canada since. From 1997 to 1999, he was president of the Edmonton Japanese Community Association. So we will now have Tak join us on screen and to say his few words. Tak? Okay, we just need you to unmute now.
Yes,
Yay.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Tak Oki. I'm a member of the Edmonton Japanese Community Association. Tonight, I want to share my personal memories of Gordon Hirabayashi with you. As you know, Gordon came to Edmonton in 1959 to teach at the University of Alberta. And he was an active member of Edmonton Japanese Community Association from the mid-1970s to early 2000. And I came to know him when I joined the EJCA in 1977. At that time, he was president of EJCA. And so we attended the same meeting, a board meeting, once a month for a long time. And every time he was just about to start talking at the meeting, other members used to tell him, "Gordon, please make it short and sweet because we have to go home soon." And he said, "Okay, sure, I'll keep it very short." But he never kept his speech short. He spoke slow, but very comprehensively. He just started from the history and went all the way and came us good solutions. He was a good moderator. And when we had heated discussions, he listened to us, and he came up with some kind of good solution which satisfied all of us. So we used to tease him, please cut it short and sweet, but we nevertheless listened to him till the end. He started the newsletter for the Edmonton Japanese Community Association in 1977, and he named it the Moshi Moshi. And this newspaper, I'm now the editor, and we've been publishing since then, over 35 years. In 1979, he wrote a short article in the Moshi Moshi and introduced us to the redress movement, which just started in the United States, in fact, in Seattle around that time. And he kept us updated about what was happening in the United States regarding the Japanese American redress movement. In 1980s, of course, he was heavily involved in the Canadian redress movement, and he was one of the local leaders of the redress movement. Now, I want to talk about some personal memories. He had his house right next to the U of A campus, so he could have walked to his office in 5 minutes or so. And after he retired, he built an extra room to his bungalow house because he wanted to have a Japanese bathroom. He invited me to take a look at this bathroom. It was a one large room attached to his bungalow. And he set up a big round hot tub, and he put tiles all around it. The idea was that just like a Japanese bathroom, he dipped into the hot tub and he came out of it and washed his body outside the bathtub, not in the bathtub. And he really loved it. And then one day, I noticed that he's got a very nice shoes. I asked him, where did you get them? And he said, I got them made free in Tokyo. And he explained to me why he could get his shoes free. His father, you may know, came from Azumino City in Nagano Prefecture as a group of about 20 or so young people who came to Seattle. And one of the persons in this group, I eventually went back to Japan and started a shoe store. And this shoe store is called Washington Shoes. And this is one of the largest shoe store chain right now. And so he and his current owner was his good friend. So every time he dropped in Tokyo, he went to this Washington Shoes and got his shoes made while he was staying there. Now, one meeting at the board meeting of EJCA, he sat next to me and he whispered to me, I'll share my secret with you. I got nervous because he didn't tell me much about his young days. So maybe he decided to tell me something important. Then he told me, when you cook rice, please mix 10% sweet rice with regular rice. It tastes much better. And I tried it, and that was true. Since this is a night we share his memory, I think it's all right for me to share his secret with you. Please mix sweet rice with regular rice when you cook. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tak. That's a great tip. I can't wait to try that.
Yeah.
So we will now move on to Greg. And we have Professor Greg Robinson. And Greg is Professor of History at the Université de Quebec à Montréal, a specialist in North American ethnic studies and U.S. political history. He is the author of several notable books. His first, called By Order of the President, FDR and the Internment of Japanese Americans, This book uncovers President Franklin Roosevelt's troubling racial views and explores his central involvement in the wartime confinement of 120,000 Japanese Americans. The book received glowing reviews. It spent 4 months on Academia Magazine's scholarly bestsellers list. His second book, A Tragedy of Democracy, Japanese Confinement in North America, was the winner of the 2009 History Book Prize of the Association for Asian American Studies. It looked at Japanese American and Japanese Canadian confinement in a transnational context. The most recent of his subsequent books, The Great Unknown, Japanese American Sketches, offers an alternative history of Japanese Americans, and that includes Gordon Hirabayashi. Professor Robinson is an active speaker and writer in the public arena and the blogosphere, writing regularly for the San Francisco Nikkei Weekly and for Discover Nikkei. So Greg's presentation is titled Gordon Hirabayashi, Redress Activist, and he will speak about Hirabayashi's activism in both the US and Canada and on the topic of individual reparations. So we're really, it's a pleasure to have Greg here today, and I will now hand the stage over to you.
Hello, everybody. I don't see that the video has gone on. So if you wish to open up my video, the end. Okay, how do you all? So I wanted to talk about Gordon Hirabayashi's long career as an outstanding man of principle, a man whose legal challenge to the wartime removal of Japanese Americans went all the way to the Supreme Court, and who later supported redress both in the United States and in Canada. Let me start by giving a brief account of his wartime experience, and then I'll explain his later life. Gordon Kiyoshi Hirabayashi was born in 1918 and raised in the town of Auburn, Washington, to a struggling farm family. In 1937, Hirabayashi enrolled at the University of Washington. He was impressed by the Quakers, whose philosophy resembled that of the Japanese Christian sect in which he had been raised, and he became an active Quaker and joined in their pacifist activities on campus. In 1942, in the wake of Executive Order 9066, he actively protested the violation of his rights as a US citizen by turning himself into the FBI and claiming that he had violated the curfew. And thus he protested the violation of his rights as a US citizen. Following a trial, first he was confined in a holding cell for 9 months and then given a trial. Following the trial, he was convicted of violating curfew regulations and of declining for register for evacuation, as it was called. He appealed, and in May 1943, the US Supreme Court heard the case of Kiyoshi Hirabayashi versus United States. The fact that his name Gordon was not put in the United States Supreme Court caption shows the official racism that he suffered. In order to strengthen its case against him, the Army engaged in willful manipulation and withholding of evidence. The Supreme Court, showing deference to military judgment in wartime, then unanimously upheld Gordon Hirabayashi's conviction. Ironically, Hirabayashi then went to jail. He had asked to be incarcerated in a road camp, but the government refused to pay for his transportation outside of the excluded West Coast zone. Thus, he was forced to hitchhike unguarded to the Catalina Honor Camp near Tucson, Arizona. In honor of Gordon Hirabayashi in 1999, that site would be renamed the Gordon Hirabayashi Recreation Site. He arrived late in Arizona, and prison officials there could not find the paperwork in his case. They discussed letting him go. Hirabayashi told them it would look too suspicious, and so finally they told him to go out for dinner and a movie and then come back. Meanwhile, they found his paperwork, and thus they incarcerated him at the site for his term. But almost no sooner had he released from prison at that road camp than he was inspired to join the movement of the Nisei draft resistors, who refused to be conscripted into the United States Army of a country that discriminated against their families. Arrested once more and convicted of draft evasion, he was sentenced to a year in the penitentiary at McNeil Island near Seattle. He and other draft resistors would later be pardoned in 1947 by President Harry S. Truman. In 1944, Hirabayashi caused a fresh public stir when he married a white woman, Esther Schmo, the daughter of the renowned peace activist and humanitarian Floyd Schmo. The two bravely went through with their wedding in the face of racist press coverage and hate mail. Esther would then be waiting with a pair of baby daughters when Gordon emerged from prison. The couple then moved into a housing project in Seattle where a son, Jay, was born in 1947. Well, after leaving prison, Gordon Hirabayashi enrolled at the University of Washington to complete his studies. And in spring 1948, as part of an MA thesis in sociology, he put together a sociometric survey of Nisei students, asking their attitudes toward other groups. The next year, he was commissioned by the Seattle chapter of the B'nai B'rith Anti-Defamation League as co-author of a large-scale survey of public attitudes toward racial and religious minorities, including Japanese Americans. His work on the surveys put him into contact with the journalist and editor Bud Fouquet, who ran the Seattle Nisei newspaper Northwest Times. Bud Fouquet invited Hirabayashi to write a weekly column, Just Among People, which started in February 1949. The columns are really wonderful to read. They reveal both Hirabayashi's sensitivity and his talent as a writer. For example, in one column, he admiringly spoke of a set of married women students in his class who bravely pursued their education, though it meant juggling childcare schedules and family finances. And he said, and I thought I had a tough road to hoe. His columns regularly drew insights from his own experience, including his wartime confinement and his interracial marriage, though he softened such discussions also by means of humor, often at his own expense. For example, one of his best pieces told of a class trip he led to McNeil Island, where he had been imprisoned during the war. Hirabayashi noted sardonically, he said, the last time I visited the island penitentiary, I was given a free trip, awarded a room and board scholarship, and didn't take the return trip for a year. This was my second trip, and I made sure that I returned the same day. Well, in 1951, Gordon Hirabayashi defended his doctoral thesis in sociology. His subject was the Doukhobors in British Columbia's Slocan Valley. It was an interesting choice of subject, although Hirabayashi seems not to have had a deep knowledge of Doukhobor culture or to have met any Doukhobors. He was no doubt impressed by the parallels between their treatment and the experience of Japanese Americans, and even more so as many Doukhobors had formed friendly relations with Japanese Canadians who had been confined in British Columbia during World War II. The next year, Hirabayashi took up a position as assistant professor of sociology at the American University in Beirut in Lebanon. 3 years later, he moved to the American University in Cairo, Egypt. During his time in Egypt, the Suez Crisis came and he was invited to leave. He retorted that as a Japanese American, he refused on principle to evacuate. Instead, he stayed in Egypt, but then, as Tax said, in 1959, Hirabayashi moved to Edmonton and accepted a position as professor of sociology at University of Alberta. He later explained that he was motivated by the thought that his children could get a better education in North America. Gordon Hirabayashi remained at Alberta University until his retirement in 1983, serving as department chair from 1962 to 1970. During these years, he worked as a specialist in race relations and in particular helped establish a new field of Asian Canadian studies, notably with the 1980 anthology he co-edited with Victor Ujimoto called Visible Minorities and Multiculturalism, Asians in Canada. In the 1980s, Hirabayashi's wartime challenge to Executive Order 9066 gained new attention when he authorized a petition to overturn his original conviction using the seldom used writ of coram nobis. The case was heard in June 1985 in the federal courthouse in Seattle, where he had originally been tried 43 years earlier. But following an inconclusive ruling, it went up on appeal. And in September 1987, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals declared that there was convincing proof of government manipulation of evidence in Hirabayashi's original Supreme Court case, and it vacated his convictions. This victory, alongside that of other Nisei who sued, may well have been persuasive in permitting Congress to enact the Civil Liberties Bill of 1988 the next year, which granted redress to Japanese Canadians. So beyond his legal case, he was a supporter of redress in the United States. For example, in February 1976, he was honored by the JCL at a dinner in Los Angeles and urged NAJC to work for reparations and supported the principle of individual reparations. Meanwhile, he worked with Japanese Canadians. As Tax said, he agreed to direct events in Alberta for the centennial of Japanese Canadian settlement and worked with the Heritage Committee. He meanwhile threw himself into the redress movement in Canada. It was an act of great generosity, as unlike in the United States, he did not stand to benefit personally from any redress award. While there's a lot more to say about the full history of his involvement, what's most important is that, as in the United States, he threw his prestige beyond payment of individual reparations rather than a lump sum payment. As he put it in 1985, redress meant, he said, establishing a meaningful, significant figure which could be granted across the board to all victims. Well, in 2003, 15 years after redress was awarded in Canada, Hirabayashi was awarded the biennial award of the NAJC in recognition of his contributions. Gordon Hirabayashi died in 2012, but his legacy lives on. And in fact, he was posthumously honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama. So that's quite a legacy to live up to in terms of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. And I really apologize for having, you had to pack a lot of information in there in a short time, but I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to hear more. Okay. Now we are going to, I will introduce Matt Miwa. He is an Ottawa-based theater, video, and performance artist. Practices which are similar, but which he keeps quite distinct from each other. In theater, Matt's proudest achievement has been successfully touring the Tashme Project, the Living Archives, across Canada in 2019. Tashme was co-created and co-produced with Montreal's Julie Tamiko Manning. Tashme is a verbatim or documentary style play which traces the oral histories of 20 Canadian NAJC from across the country. In Ottawa, Matt has proudly served on the board of the Ottawa Japanese Community Association for the past 7 years. And has occupied the position of vice president for now for 2 years. Surprisingly to Matt, the pandemic opened a new avenue in his artistic practice, where he has seriously pursued drawing now for over a year. His newest project is They Who Say Yes, an illustrated adaptation of a theater play. And this adaptation is meant as a script for actors rather than a book. So now we are going to show Matt's reading from We Hold These Truths, written by Jeanne Sakata. And Greg, can I just ask you to stop your video? Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Matt Miwa, and I'm an Ottawa-based actor. I'm also the Vice President of the Ottawa Japanese Community Association. Thank you so much for having me at this event honoring Gordon Hirabayashi. I'm so proud to be able to read from Jeanne Sakata's play, Hold These Truths. It's a fantastic play, and I hope to do it justice. I'll be reading 2 excerpts from the play. One is from the very top of the play, where Gordon is discussing Quaker philosophy. And then I'll explain the next jump when I get there. Here we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Do we indeed believe in the existence of self-evident truth, which by the very rightness of its being needs no human justification? And if we say such truths exist, how will they appear to us? In fragments or in full? Over seconds or over centuries? And when they are made known to us, how fully will we see them? Will our vision of them be dimmed by the darkness of human corruption? Our Quaker philosophy of life begins with the faith of George Fox, who said he saw an ocean of darkness and death, but also an infinite ocean of light and love, which flowed over the ocean of darkness. And in that moment, Fox said he saw the infinite love of God. Rufus Jones, our fellow Quaker, writes, "The ocean of darkness is a fact. The black squares on the great chessboard of the world are as unmistakable as the white squares. The real problem which always faces us is whether the white squares are on a black background or the black squares on a white. The Quaker philosophy of life insists the black squares are on a white background, and that an infinite ocean of love flows over a finite ocean of darkness. This is the basis of Quaker mysticism and of Quaker optimism, and of the universal spirit of fellowship and sympathy, which belongs to these people who call themselves by the beautiful name of friends. This is what we aspire to. Aspire to seek to attain a particular goal, to soar to a great height. And yet, before we are able to soar, we must often plumb great depths. So now I'm going to skip ahead in the play where Pearl Harbor has just happened, and the government has issued evacuation orders to all Japanese Americans and of course Japanese Canadians, and Gordon is deciding whether or not to register himself as an enemy alien. Barbed wire, miles of it, stretched on wooden posts, snaking around the fairgrounds, surrounding the entire, like pigs, like cattle, like there, over by the grandstands. They're moving us into horse stalls. The stench, I can smell it from where I stand. May 10th, the day arrives. The notice went up for my district. The day of departure, May 16th, a week. 7 days. Gordon reads a notice. Everyone with 1/16 Japanese blood must go. So I start to pack. Friends drop in to say goodbye, and there's a lot of tears and hugs, and so many I have trouble getting it done, and I have to rush to finally finish, and Gordon drops a book. Picks it up. Freshman Civics. America, land of the free. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty. Blessings of liberty. And the words burn on that textbook page, each word and eye staring evenly into mine. No person shall be held to answer for a capital crime unless on an indictment of a grand jury, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. I phone my friend Art Barrett, a young Quaker attorney, and tell him I've got some questions. I grill him on the Fifth Amendment and Gord, why are you asking? What the heck are you up to, Gord? I hang up the phone. I get my Nisei buddy Bill to come over before I can change my mind. And after we agonize all night, we shake hands, declaring we'll buck this thing together. But only a few hours later, Bill, Gordy, I gotta talk to you. Gordy, I just can't do it. My parents are getting on, and I'm an only child, so all they have is me. If something were to happen to them, I would never, Good luck, Gordy. You got a lot of guts. Bill's situation is different from mine. My brothers can look after my folks. They won't be left alone. But back in my room at night, I stare at the ceiling, unable to sleep, heart pounding, stomach churning. Because I'm on my own now. And it gets worse from there. Mom. I break the news to her that night, but the words already spread like wildfire. She stands there calmly, arms folded. She tells me she agrees with me, praises me for a courageous choice, but these are dangerous times, she says. If I don't go with our family, we may be forever separated. Rumors are flying up the coast that we'll be thrown into jail for years, or shipped back to Japan for good, or taken to the desert and shot. Mom, please listen to me. Eddie and Jim aren't kids anymore. They know how to take care of themselves, and you and Dad and Dick and Tosh, and you don't need me to go with you. No, you have a special duty. You are Chonan, the eldest son. Then she lets me have it. Our home is being flooded, she says, flooded with phone calls hourly from friends, neighbors, relatives, Japanese community leaders. You gotta make him change his mind. You gotta make him understand. We have to obey the government. We have to prove our loyalty. Look what they're doing to us. They are terrified that you'll make them suspect too. How can you put them in danger? How can you be so selfish? Mom, when I was just 5 years old and we were at the Seattle Sears and that guard was staring and staring at you, and you said if they accused you of stealing, you'd protest and sue the police. And then you and Dad lost the farming commune because of that alien land law, and you went to court to fight it. Maketa, we lost. Yes, but you tried. Do you have any idea what the government could do to you? They might beat you, torture you, leave you to starve and die. They could throw you into a dungeon like the Count of Monte Cristo, and I might never see you again. Gordon, anata wa chonen desu. You have a responsibility. Yes, I have a responsibility to live by my own principles. Just this once, Gordon, put principles aside. Onagai. Mom, no, let me do this. I'm going to do this, I am. My words hit her like a gunshot. And then she crumbles. Sinks to her knees and weeps. Mom. We part ways. A sense of time passes before Gordon can continue. Then he forces himself to take out pen and paper. May 13th, 1942. Over and above any man-made law is the natural law of life. The right of human individuals to life and to creatively express themselves. No man was born with the right to limit that law. This order for the mass evacuation of all persons of Japanese descent denies them the right to live. It forces thousands of energetic, law-abiding individuals to exist in a miserable psychological and a horrible physical atmosphere. It kills the desire for a higher life. Hope for the future is exterminated. Human personalities are poisoned. Over 60% are American citizens, yet they are denied, without due process of law, the civil liberties which are theirs. If I were to register and cooperate under these circumstances, I would be giving helpless consent to the denial of practically all the things which give me incentive to live. I consider it my duty to maintain the democratic standards for which this nation lives. Therefore, I must refuse this order for evacuation. Signed, Gordon K. Hirabayashi. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That was really wonderful, powerful performance. Can we have you back on on screen, so you can take a bow and maybe just say a few words about your performance.
Hyland, I can't start the video. You have to start it on your end.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll ask. Okay.
There I am. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Jeannie. The play is a very powerful play, and it brought back a lot of memories from when I was interviewing Nisei for my own project. I just want to say that what struck me most from that excerpt, especially the end, was that the play is a portrait of a man of faith, but also a man of ideas. And I think that merged there, especially his great faith in the American Constitution, where I think that he felt very seen by the Constitution. It's like the Constitution for him was, and I could be wrong, was equal to his Christian teachings, in that both saw in him something that was good and was an aspirational thing for him. And as the Constitution afforded him kind of a framework that he knew that in himself he was worthy of a good life, and the Constitution, he thought, guaranteed him that self-worth that he felt inside could manifest in the world, in the country. Even though, as Jeannie, you write in the play, he was dealing constantly with contradictions, where even when he was kind of navigating the world, there's a story in the play where he had to plan out with his dates where he could bring them. Like there was no Asians were allowed in this spot, or this spot, or he would have to kind of find his way home. That was the safest, I guess, for him, to not encounter any, aggression on the way home. So even though he navigated all these anti-Asian sentiments, for him, the Constitution and the Supreme Court guaranteed for him that he had a right to a full and fair life in this country. And I think it was as important to him as his Christian teachings. So anyways, it's a very powerful play for that perspective. And I didn't know anything really about Quakers before this, but it's a religion based on a lot of integrity, I think. So anyways.
Thank you, Matt. We are running a little bit behind. So Jeannie, I hope you don't mind. I put some of your biographical information in the chat, because I think we really want to have a 3 or 4-way discussion, as well as taking questions from the group. So Jeanne Sakata, the play has won rave reviews in over 20 productions across North America, most recently at the San Diego Repertory Theater and the Cultch Historic Theater in Vancouver. So as well, the Theater for Honolulu Theater for Youth, co-produced with Daniel Day Kim, and many other productions, although I was noticing and looking at this long list that there weren't any productions out east in Canada. So there's something to think about. There are, unlike the US, there's almost the same number of Japanese Canadians in Ontario and Quebec as there are in British Columbia on the East Coast. So, something to think about.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're called a local treasure by the Los Angeles Times.
Oh.
And green credits include Jennifer Fang's internationally acclaimed indie film, Advantageous, and TV guest recurring roles on Station 19, High School Musical, Desperate Housewives and and many other, well-known television series. So I have put all that information in the chat. I hope you, I'm just going to mention at the end here, you've received special honors such as the Theater LA Ovation Award for Outstanding Lead Actress, the 2019 Trailblazer Award for Outstanding Artistic Achievement, and the 2016 Lee Melville Award for Outstanding Contribution to the Los Angeles theater community. And I mean, that's a big town, right? So I think we're pretty lucky to have you here today. So thank you so much. So,
I feel lucky to be here with you, all of you. Been so moved by all your presentations.
well, thank you so much. So we're going to try and do this, maybe Matt and maybe Greg might start off with a question they have for you about Gordon or the play.
Well, I don't have a question. I was just really hoping, Jeannie, that you could kind of elucidate more on the conversation that we were having about the influence of Gordon's mother on his life, just for the people, because I found it so important.
Oh, yes. Gordon had a very special and fascinating mother. I think she's someone that actually deserves a play of her own. For a Japanese Issei woman, Gordon told me in my interviews with him that she was just way ahead of her time. She lived in this dichotomy of being absolutely intellectually brilliant and forceful and of a fiery temperament, even though she was a devoted Christian. She just had this naturally fiery temperament. And she was a real thinker and leader in the community. But the dichotomy for her, her name was Mitsu, and the dichotomy for her was that she could not really show that brilliance too obviously in the Japanese American community of her time because of the culture. It was the culture that men led the community, and the women, were, seen as fulfilling certain obligations culturally in roles as mothers and wives, and the accepted roles they had within the communities. But Mitsu Hirabayashi was elected vice president of the local Japanese association, which was, really unheard of for a woman to occupy a position of leadership like that. And Gordon told me many stories of her where she would have to go to meetings and propose ideas to the Japanese association and have to present them as her husband's ideas or her son's ideas. And so everyone knew apparently that she was this brilliant woman, but no one could really outwardly acknowledge that socially because it just wasn't, the norm of that time. So one of the stories I told Matt that I love was that she apparently wrote this article, not an article, but an ongoing a column in which her son Ed told me she was just giving these scathing reports of how hard and how restricting it was to be an Issei farmer's wife, And the funny thing was she wrote under a pen name, under a false name. And apparently one of her friends read this column and came to her and said, "Is this you? This sounds exactly like you." And she just played total innocent and said, "Oh, I have no idea who that is." So I thought she was just a fascinating character. Here she was reading Gone with the Wind in Japanese translation, and in the play, and this is an absolutely true story that Gordon told me in my interviews with him. She said, Rhett Butler, he did many bad things, but that was a real man. She thought Ashley Wilkes was, kind of insipid and, not really, a real man the way Rhett Butler was. And I thought that was so hilarious. And I said, whatever happens with the rest of the things that I have to cut from the play, that is staying in. So yeah, she's someone that really deserves her own play, and someone that really truly influenced Gordon the way he tells it. You know, he said a lot of NAJC asked him, how could you even think to challenge and resist these government orders? It never occurred to us to resist and challenge them. And he said, well, I had my icebreakers, you know, in my own family, I had my mom and my dad. And I think in resisting, you know, they both set examples for him, because they did challenge when their farming commune was going to be taken away from them. They did challenge those orders, and they lost, but he had that example of, you know, resistance in his own family.
Taking on the bull, eh?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have something to say, Lynn? No. Well, one other question is, and going back to our conversation too, is the break that he had when his heart was broken and his faith was broken when the Supreme Court rejected his appeal, or not his appeal, his case. He was so sure that he was in the right and that the Constitution guaranteed him this right, and that you know, these acts were illegal against you know, all persons of Japanese or racial origin. Going over the play again, the conviction and just his framework is so strong and so clear. I was just hoping that you can explain to the people watching what that really was for him, that moment when he came across that huge crisis in his life, where his faith was shattered and the Constitution was not upheld for him. And what a horrible realization that the ideas that you hold on to in life, and that you believe your country, what you believe your country is, it fails you, and how he pushed on, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I feel that, you know, in your reading, you portrayed that so beautifully, that belief he had. So thank you so much. The passion that Gordon had for the words of the Constitution. And I only spent a few days with Gordon. I interviewed him extensively, so I can't really speak as an expert, you know, on all the different facets of how he dealt with this. But what he told me in our interviews was that he believed that the lower courts, you know, he didn't know if they would vindicate him, and he was not actually surprised when they did not. But he saw the Supreme Court justices as guardians of the Constitution. And he said, there it was in black and white. I didn't see how they could refuse me. There it was in black and white, you know. And I know that I remember he told me that he never would have expected them to rule against him unanimously. That was a real shock to him, because, you know, and we think of when we were that age, you think of college kids that we know that are fighting for justice, and they're young and they're idealistic and their whole life is ahead of them, and they pour their whole life's hopes into these political battles. And I think Gordon very much was like that, you know, as a young student. He cherished the ideals of the Constitution. He saw that, you know, his parents could not be citizens. He was a citizen because of his being born in the United States. And many of the NAJC took that very much to heart, that they were citizens, and were shocked, absolutely shocked, when the government told them that they had to go into camps too. So I think that that's the youthful idealism that I think is so key to the play, and so key to Gordon in the play, looking to the Supreme Court to be the guardians of the Constitution. And I will say too that, the demands of writing a good play are not always consistent with how things happen in real life. So there is some fictionalizing in the play and some dramatizing. And I think that Gordon in real life, although he was keenly disappointed in the Supreme Court ruling, it never stopped him from leading a full and rich life. But I had to really portray that devastation to make a good play. Gordon in the play sets out as a real idealist, and the apex of the play dramatically is Gordon going to the Supreme Court or his Supreme Court battle. It's really a dramatic center of the play and the peak of the play. And we had to portray kind of that classic battle of the character, the protagonist, being shattered and temporarily losing that faith. But I think that is a classic kind of psychological, spiritual journey that many people go through. That moment where we find out that the world as we know it and the expectations that we have and the hopes are not realized, and where we're devastated, and we have to pick up the pieces of that disappointment and that devastation and find a way through to hold on to that faith. And I believe that's what Gordon actually did, in the play and in his real life. He never gave up hope that one day his case would be revisited. And 40 years later, with an amazing effort, it was, and his case was taken back into the courts by Sansei attorneys, who had seen their own parents suffer in the camps, working pro bono for years to try and overturn these criminal convictions of Gordon, Minyasui, and Fred Korematsu. And they were able to win victory in overturning these criminal convictions. So it was an amazing story to work on, amazing story for me as a Sansei to visit and to integrate into my own understanding what happened to my own parents. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Yes, no, of course. I regret some from the intro video that he didn't live to receive that medal from President Obama. I think it would have been, just so what's it called? Rested. It would have meant a lot, I'm sure.
Yes, and I think to be honored with such a diverse group of Americans, I think alongside Gordon, John Glenn, Dolores Huerta, Bob Dylan were honored. And I think that Gordon's son Jay was a Bob Dylan fan and was so pleased that his dad was being honored in the same year that Bob Dylan was. But it was really wonderful to see Susan Carnahan, Gordon's second wife, go up there and be there with President Obama and receive the Medal of Freedom on his behalf. It's just a beautiful moment.
I'm going to have to let you know that unfortunately we are a little bit over time, but hopefully people won't mind if we go maybe 10 minutes over. And we have two questions, which the first one relates to someone who is hoping to have the connections made to, asking if outreach efforts will be made with the Quaker community, since Gordon was involved with the Society of Friends, and that it's important to recognize his links beyond our community, his anti-war efforts. And that's kind of given me an idea for the tour. It's like, this Chris Karata, who's asked that question, you can be the tour manager for the Quaker circuit, okay? Volunteers here.
Well, I'll answer that by saying we've had over 20 productions of Hold These Truths in the United States, and one in Vancouver. We're really so very pleased that we were able to perform the play for some Japanese Canadian audiences. And with most of these productions, we've tried to reach out to whatever Quaker community is in that area. And I know that when we did the New York production, we had a couple of people who were very involved with the Quakers in the Manhattan area. They came and did talkbacks for us about what Gordon's Quaker faith must have meant to him as he fought this battle on behalf of, for his constitutional rights. And I think that Matt said something that was very, very true. I think that Gordon really did not separate in his mind the principles of the Constitution and his own Quaker principles. I think he saw them as very parallel. And so we've been really fortunate to have had the input of Quakers in different communities where we've taken the play and have them come in and talk about the Quaker faith and have them talk about, like in New York, as I said, one that personally knew Gordon. And we've been able to do some outreach. This was also in New York, to a Quaker school there and invite them to bring students. So we'll continue to do this. The play is still being performed.
Okay.
And there were actually 3 productions that were canceled because of COVID. We hope to bring them back. And in each place, we will do outreach to the Quaker community, because I think that was just key to who Gordon was his Quaker faith.
Okay, there is a nice friendship house in Toronto, which the last time I was there for a training for people who are sponsoring Syrian refugees. So they're still connected to those kinds of good works. So the other question and the final question will be about Gordon. I just have to read this. He rejects the role of eldest son. So what do you think his attitude was towards Japanese culture?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of that.
Oh, because Gordon rejects the role of eldest son.
Oh, I see.
What do you think his attitude was towards Japanese culture?
Well, what Gordon told me was, his parents, as the eldest son, put a lot of pressure on him. And they were always saying things like, don't tell any of your brothers or your sister, but this is just for you as the eldest son. And I think that what I remember Gordon telling me is he felt that burden very keenly. And he was always telling his parents, no, you should tell this to Eddie and Jim too, and to Dick. You shouldn't tell it just to me. But they were very much, of course, because they came from Japan, the whole idea of the eldest son was very, very important to them. And they never quite let go of that. They told Gordon as eldest son, he had a responsibility to set an example for his younger brothers and sister, to get good grades, to be, kind of the shining light in the community. And I think that, having been born in America and experiencing American culture, he felt a sense of, wanting to share that in wanting to have a more equal status in the family with his brothers and sisters, and sister. So that's what I remember him telling me. But I think that in terms of Japanese culture, it took Gordon a while, as it does, I think, for a lot of us raised in Japanese American families, to overcome the sentiment of that saying that's at the beginning of the play, the deru kugi wa utareru. I know even as a sansei that I think the general way I was raised is you consider the group first. And if anything that you feel as an individual goes against the greater good of the group, you probably shouldn't pursue that. And I think outcome of that, or the result, is that I think a lot of even sansei generation have a hard time really feeling like our feelings and our convictions as individuals to go and stick out and be an individual. We fight what we were raised with, is that with that sense of, the greater good of the group. So I very much saw that in Gordon's, he called it a kind of schizophrenia, with the Nisei upbringing of seeing these promises in the Constitution and that all are created equal, and yet on a daily basis experiencing that that was not true, in his experience, in his world. And he called it a kind of schizophrenia. And I think the journey of the play is that Gordon becomes a whole person. Those barriers between those different parts of his life gradually come down, and he cannot live as a divided person anymore. But it's a tension that I think a lot of Japanese Americans experience, and we can all relate to that.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. There is so much to talk about.
Yes, so much.
Especially, Gordon's mother. That's really interesting. One of my grandmothers was on the Japanese Cultural Center board in the early days. And I heard from someone who was the other woman on the board that it was it wasn't easy going. Yeah. So, so many layers to this experience. I'm going to call on the president of the Edmonton Japanese Community Association, Paul, to join us, because he is going to say a few words about the Edmonton community, and then I will close things off shortly after him. So Paul?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we just need you to, there you are.
There we go.
Hey, Paul.
Technology is wonderful,
yeah,
when it works.
I guess, yes, a few, Paul, he's the president of the EJCA, Paul Fujishiga, and a simple inquiry he made to the NAJC. But what we were doing in the way of human rights has led him down a much longer path than he expected. For the last 10 years, he's been editor of the EJCA newsletter, and he's been a member of the EJCA and the senior group for about 3 years, and a board member for 2 years, and now president. So, Paul?
Thank you very much, Lynn. I'm really honored and pleased to have been part of this tonight. I learned more about Gordon. I'd heard quite a bit about him previously, but it's quite an honor to be able to represent EJCA at this event. I think I have a few thoughts. One was, and some of it's been explained, he was a very brave man. He stood by his principles. And it was at a time when it would have been almost impossible to do that. So great admiration for him to have done that. The pressure that would have been on him to conform and go along would have been great. And I think the other aspect, and I think that kind of was hinted at, he would have had a lot of resistance from within his own community. It was, as I like to think of it, the Japanese way. You respect authority. If authority says that something is necessary, well, then you go along with it. If the government says you will get your property back once the war is over, and you get a piece of paper saying that that's what will happen, then you trust that that's what will happen. And I know my parents and many others, most others, went along with this idea that that would be honored. And of course, we know that that didn't happen. My father was very upset about how that worked out. He couldn't even talk about it to me while he was alive. My mother was able to talk, but I mean, he very much believed if you had a promise, you made a promise, you kept it. And if you didn't, it was a huge betrayal. And I don't think the governments of Canada and the US realized just how much how important that was to Japanese Canadians. And so to be betrayed like that was really something very bad. And I guess that just puts Gordon's life into perspective as being just how valuable his kind of advocacy was for us. And as a next generation and generations after, we have the benefit of his advocacy. We were able to see redress, we were able to see an apology, and we were ultimately able to regain our citizenship and our dignity. And so we owe an awful lot to Gordon and others like him who stood during the time that it was very difficult to do that. I think the last thing I'd like to say is, I think the legacy that he left us is reflected in EJCA and what we do today. I invite you to go to our website, ejca.org. You'll see Moshi Moshi, the latest issue. That was something he started. There's even a couple of articles this month about racism. And so some of the same things he talked about are still very relevant and prevalent today. But I think larger than that, I think what EJCA is an example of how we've become a multicultural kind of organization. We have almost as many members who are not from a Japanese background as are. And we come together to, because we're interested in learning and experiencing the Japanese culture. And so all of the activities we have at our center reflect that. And also at the same time that it's within our Canadian democratic culture. We believe in some values of equality, and we like to think of what we do as kind of the best of both worlds. We have the best of Japanese culture and the best of Canadian culture. And so I'd like to thank Lynn and the others for organizing this, especially for the play that Jeannie wrote. And I'm hopeful that someday the play will actually be premiered in Edmonton, where Gordon spent many, many years, because we would certainly like to see the play in its entirety. To Matt and to Tak for sharing for Matt for his wonderful performance, and for Tak for sharing his memories. So again, on behalf of EJCA, congratulations, and we're very honored to be part of this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And if we can have everyone, Jean, Matt, Greg, back on stage, just a short farewell so we can see everyone again. Thank you so much. I really hope this is the beginning of something bigger, something across Canada. I mean, he really is a perfect figure to bring our two communities together. And also, I now have this vision of seeing the play at the Friendship House in Toronto. So that was a
we would love to bring the play to Edmonton.
Yeah, and
we've tried a couple of times, but it hasn't worked out. But we're not giving up hope.
Yeah, not just Edmonton, cross.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
So,
fantastic.
Thank you so much. There's a short little 3-minute video with, you know, after we close, it has a bit of information about 2 upcoming events. And we packed a lot of information into this 90 minutes. And my apologies to everyone if I've kind of had to cut you short, but we did want it to be a celebration of friends from many places, and it certainly has been. We'll send a follow-up email with information about all of our guests, maybe in about a week or so. And to get award information, you can go to our website, or you can just Google NAJC and Hirabayashi, and you'll get right to the awards page. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll
thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, good night, and
Good night.
Everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have Diana will start our end video.